He has wiped out by his grace through faith in Christ your every sin, past, present, future.
Christian hedonist is somebody who says that my greatest joy, my greatest good is God. And therefore, I will pursue that joy and I will pursue that God above all else. So God's glorified and I'm satisfied.
You are now listening to the Pastor Discussions Podcast.
What's up, everybody? Welcome to episode number 76 of the Pastor Discussions Podcast. I'm John.
And I'm Joe, and this is your weekly conversation on doctrine, faith, and the Christian life.
It's gotten hot out, man.
It is June.
It's that...
It's that time of year.
It's
cool
the
time.
Humid.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Here.
The heavy...
Yeah.
Like, I didn't expect that in Nebraska.
Well...
It's because of all the irrigation and stuff, but I did not expect that because we had that type of like wet, heavy, humid heat in Missouri, but it was like, okay, there's lakes everywhere and it rains a lot more. And then we came up here and that surprised me. It really surprised me. I was expecting like dry, arid heat, not.
Yeah, you think it would be because you even go down. You just go just south of us into Kansas, especially western Kansas, and you get that dry heat there because they just don't have the.
Because they don't have enough water to even water their plants. So. So this is always
like, hot and humid.
For me, this is the seasonal transition that is most difficult because it's just like you can get warm, but it's harder to get cool.
Yeah, you just got to go out in it.
And my internal body temperature is all weird anyway.
Yeah.
So.
This is always like
help.
When it goes from cold to hot is the hardest one because it just feels so hot. But you just gotta. I worked out in it too, so you just power through it and you sweat like crazy for a couple weeks, and then your body finally adjusts. So,
well, we're part of the Bar Podcast Network. Check out thebarpodcast.com and get more great biblical content for your ear holes, and then also check out resurrectioncoffeeco.com and get some of that resurrection coffee from Dave in Chicago. So let's pick up where we left off last week, man.
So we started a conversation about abortion. That's kind of the main thing we're trying to address. But we talked about in addressing abortion, people who are advocates for it, who don't necessarily think abortion's good, is what they'll say. I'm not for abortion, but I'm for it being a woman's right, and I'm for it because of all these other secondary issues that if we would take it away, we would expose. And then the main thing that people who are advocates of it will argue is that you don't care about any of those other things. All you care about is the life inside the womb. You don't care about it once it gets outside of the womb.
Right.
That's kind of the lingering argument. So we talked last week about what our role is in engaging in this discussion so that we can have an actual productive discussion on abortion, because it gets thrown into the weeds and you can never actually talk about the actual issue because the one person talk about all these other things and you're only if you're pro-life, you're only talking about this one thing.
Yeah.
So what's our responsibility, because we should and do care so much about those children who are being murdered in the womb, to engage in those other pieces so that we can actually have a real discussion about the issue that we're wanting to talk about.
And at the same time, acknowledge areas that those people have valid points. Like it kind of comes down to sort of that partisan politics type of approach where the other person has to be 100% wrong on everything because they're 100% wrong on one thing. And so what we're saying is in this discussion, in this conversation, you can hold to, and you should hold to, that abortion is murder and morally wrong and ethically wrong and against God's character and sin. But at the same time, acknowledge when somebody says something where they have a legitimate point, while their premise might be wrong. In other words, their premise might be, because of this, we should allow this other wicked thing. Acknowledging, okay, yeah, this is wrong too. This is a thing that needs to be addressed as well, as opposed to writing off everything that somebody says simply because they're wrong on one issue. And so today we're going to keep on talking about that. And we highlighted in particular adoption and orphan care last week, and the role that Christians should be playing in that. And I mean, I just sort of, as a segue, sort of tag on to last week. And I really think that, especially in our culture now, those things are so off the grid for a lot of people.
Well, and I think to the point of a person who argues for, why is it that believers are so passionate about abortion? They should be, right, and trying to fight it and saying that should be illegalized, that it's wrong. We should all see that. Like, I agree, but why is there not the same outcry from believers, and a willingness to stand up and make laws or to protest or whatever, something to that same effect for the orphan?
Sort of like
and that's the inconsistency that people who are arguing it see and say, well, you don't care about the kids in the orphanage, you only care about this one issue.
Yeah, I think the analogy that I think we used it last week, I can't remember, but it's like with missions, you're either a goer or a sender. And I think we should have that same type of attitude when it comes to adoption and orphan care.
Yeah.
You're either an adopter or a care provider for an orphan, or you're a equiper to allow that to happen. So I think that part of the problem is that in a lot of our contexts, especially Midwest, rural, middle class, you can become so insulated from the points of pain and the points of need in your community, and they exist in all of our communities, but you can become so insulated from them that they become invisible to you. They disappear off your grid. They're not even something that you're aware of. And so like we have some educators in our congregation, and they've been really helpful in highlighting, bringing to light, just through conversations, not like they're sharing names or anything else. Like, it's just like, as we talk, sharing that there are needs here in our community.
Yeah.
There are people there are kids that are basically functionally orphans and that need care. And so anyway, my point was just simply like, as we segue into that, into our conversation today, part of the issue in what we're going to talk about this week and what we talked about last week is just the invisibility of it for a lot of people, because they're not directly exposed to it. And so it's very easy for those things to become periphery and fall out by the wayside. And we're just saying, like, we need to be aware of them, and we should be passionately pursuing avenues to help and address those issues and not allow them to become invisible issues.
Which is hard because certain things get put up on pedestals, and right now all the things that are getting put up and being made visible are things that are very polarizing, and they pull you to one side or the other. I think by and large, if orphans were put up in that light, like abortion is, I would think, you got to be careful with that, that everyone would agree that it needs to be addressed.
Yeah.
But it gets pushed down, just like some of these other issues that advocates for abortion bring up. So let's continue talking about that. We talked about the orphan and adoption and gave you some ideas last week on just thinking through that and things to start doing. So let's try to stay off there. So we're going to try to cover everything else that goes into. We'll see how this goes.
Yeah.
So I kind of talking about the widow and the elderly, but the main point that I was getting at with that is there's this healthcare piece.
Yeah.
That side wants to bring up. You don't care about the mother. You only care about the child.
Mm-hmm.
Like, you don't care about her rights. You don't care about her health. You don't care about her prenatal conditions. You don't care about her housing situation. You don't care that she's a single mom or a victim or whatever it is. You don't care about that person. You only care about the child. Hey, is that a true statement? And what can they point to defend whether that is true or not? And so most of the time they'll point to your political party, which most people who are pro-life are conservative, and the fact that conservatives don't really line up with a government healthcare system.
Mm-hmm.
Like they're against the government. They're against big government for the most part.
Right.
We're more of that stuff should be between yourself and your care provider or whatever. Whatever.
Or at least delegated down to the states,
Yeah.
or some
So
variation.
the government
of that.
should stay
Yeah.
out of it.
Yeah, the federal government should stay out of
Right.
it. Yeah.
Well, at that same time, so those people are saying, well, there's nothing that's affordable for this person. We should be taking care of them, and so the government steps into that.
Mm-hmm.
And so their idea of taking care of that is the government, and your idea is no, that should be left for the people.
Mm-hmm.
But the people aren't doing it, and the government tries to come up with these ideas, and so they say, well, you're for this idea of the people will do it, so you just don't care about that person because nobody's doing it, and
Yeah.
you're just like, whatever, go get it. You've got an attitude. Most conservative people have an attitude, go get a job.
Mhm.
Like, pull up your pants and how to put your legs through your pants, right? You know
Right,
how to
yeah.
put your shoes on. You can go and get a job. You can go and provide for yourself. That's the mindset of most conservative people. And in that mindset, you can be so blinded to there's actual barriers to people being able to provide for themselves.
Right.
Or you're unwilling to help them overcome that barrier so that they can stand on their own 2 feet and go and provide for themselves. It's just a homeless guy on the street. He's just a bum. He's just lazy. There's no other possibility there.
Yeah. So there's like, it's interesting because as you start to talk about this can become very convoluted very quickly because what you have.
So maybe before you bring up a good point. I was thinking about this week. A lot of this, I think also we need to be careful of because it can be like, I'm going to distract you from the core issue. So there's a way in which we can engage in the conversation, but not get pulled into the weeds where we don't actually talk about what we're actually trying to talk about and address.
Right. And at the same time, like as you look at issues, especially like healthcare, we didn't arrive where we're at overnight. There's a years and decades of incremental moves toward government healthcare, government regulation to the point where healthcare is incredibly unaffordable. All these different things. Now, I'm not an expert in this by any stretch of the imagination, but in all of these different sort of social issues that surround the abortion debate, we haven't arrived there overnight. There's been decades of history in that. So the problem can seem incredibly overwhelming and almost like unsolvable. Like we've reached a point where we just can't even go back. And so in having these conversations, like I think we need to keep that in mind because the situation for the single mom trying to afford healthcare is very different now than it was 40 years ago. And that needs to be acknowledged, that healthcare is less affordable. It is, I mean, there are people that have like full coverage healthcare and they can take that for granted because there are a lot of people that just can't afford that. Like they get sick and that's like, all right, well, we're not going to go to the doctor unless we're going to die, type of thing. Like, I mean, I'm exaggerating a little bit, but you've got some people that have the type of healthcare coverage where they can go to the doctor whenever they want to. And it's not a big deal.
Yeah.
Other people, it's like you've got to be really sick to go. And you kind of do this triage where you're like, oh, I can't go for this. I can't go for this.
Yeah.
I can't afford this. I can't afford this. And then, so my point is that plays into it. We can't take sort of like in the same way with church contextualization, we can fall into this rut or into this ditch of saying, well, this is the way we did it 40 years ago. We just need to keep doing it this way. And the point is we don't live 40 years ago. And I think that same point is true for conversations around this type of thing too. We have to acknowledge the reality of where we're at. And all right, let's try to find solutions to that. But at the same time, don't just fall into well, the default is this person is lazy and can't get a job. Like this single mom might be working 2 jobs, and between those 2 jobs has just enough health coverage to be able to meet basic healthcare needs.
Right. So you can have. I mean, I know these are they're extreme scenarios, but you can have somebody who gets pregnant and there's the dad's not going to be around, and she is already working 2 jobs, and she's going to bring this baby into the world. How's she going to take care of it? So, well, then she's got to go to daycare because she's still got to work the 2 jobs.
Right, yeah.
And then there's extra cost. And so there's all these social problems that are put into the debate.
Mm-hmm. Even there are people that are vehemently opposed to women in the workplace. And I know a lot of families where the wife doesn't want to work but needs to work in order to be able to afford healthcare.
Yeah.
Because that other job might not provide a substantial income, but it provides secondary insurance, which covers them so that their family can go to the doctor.
Yep.
So my point is just simply, it's not the same world it was 40 years ago. So let's acknowledge the reality of where we're at today in this conversation.
The cost of living is not the same either.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of change that's happened in the last 40 years. So we need to acknowledge that. And I think by and large, most people are willing to acknowledge that there's been a lot of change, but there's still a very cynical attitude towards people who are in that position versus people who aren't, who are providing for themselves, who are, biting the bullet and paying for healthcare, whatever it is. And so we tend to look at those people and we look at them as mooches or lazy people or so on and so forth, whatever you want to put to that label. So the thing that I wanted to address is the main thing is, how do we engage in this conversation so that it doesn't get lost, so that we hear each other versus, because my main example when we were in Iowa is I saw a couple of debates, and there was a pro-life gal and a pro-choice guy talking, and he wouldn't say that abortion is okay. He was kind of saying that it was wrong, but at the same time not, by saying that's between her and her doctor
Right. It's like, I'm against this, but I can see why it's necessary.
And this other the gal is saying, no, you're saying it's okay to do this. You're saying it's okay. And he's saying, no, I'm not saying that. Here's what I'm saying. And she's staying in her realm of trying to hold his feet to the fire and only talking about the one issue. And he's up here talking about all these other issues.
Yeah.
So how can we actually talk about those issues together? So with that, most Christians, I don't believe, are willing to come out of that realm of saying, you have to say this is wrong first. And they're not willing to come out of their realm of saying, look at all these other issues. So our responsibility is to still say, this is wrong, and I'm going to show you how this is wrong, but I'm going to engage. Okay, I'm going to engage in this issue on healthcare. Okay, what can we do to provide that? So talk about not the practical solutions, but the core solutions to what you see. It's like, you know what, you're right. This has been neglected by people who say that they care about other people. Mm-hmm. That they care about not just their spiritual health, but also their physical health. But yet that doesn't play itself out. Okay, maybe we need to acknowledge that, but at the same time not ignore. It's like you can't have two, one thing wrong, one thing wrong, and so let's make a solution that's also wrong,
right?
But not talk about that and talk about all the other things in the weeds. I don't know how to engage in this healthcare thing, to be honest with you. So it is so outrageously unaffordable for, I would say, the majority of people. It's so
well, and it's so out of control of the consumer. So there are actually there are some doctors that are starting to move to pay for service type of services, type of healthcare. And basically what they do is they try to make it affordable and still get a profit, because doctors have to make money too. It's a job. You got to provide for your family. Yet at the same time circumventing the whole insurance thing. So then the government comes in and says, no, you have to have insurance or you're going to be have a penalty on your taxes. And
no, it's just a tax.
Oh, it's just a tax.
It's not a fine.
It's a healthcare tax. Yeah. It's a lack of healthcare tax, whatever. Like that, exactly. So my point is that there's people that are trying to find solutions. And then there's this whole government involvement piece. And when we're talking about this, I saw this documentary on the Mayo Clinic, and how it got started and everything. It was like a PBS documentary or something like that. Really amazing story. So this PBS documentary, this guy started a clinic and started trying some different types of procedures and caring for people that were basically told, well, you're just going to die. That's it. So he took a step in trying to address an issue, but then it's like these nuns served as nurses. So in Missouri, we had like St. John's or whatever hospital or whatever. The reason it's called St. John's is because there was a Catholic diocese that started a hospital to care for people, in particular, in many cases, people that were poor and needy. And so there's sort of like this whole ministry of the church that in our autonomy of the local church, which I affirm, and in the lack of sort of, especially
structure.
especially in Baptist circles, this lack of hierarchical structure, we've kind of lost something in that. And that is like the ability to band together to address these issues in a practical, meaningful way. But then on top of that, you've got the fact that it's so regulated that you almost can't afford to do something like that today. You know what I mean? So you've got things coming from both sides where, in that conversation, you're almost like you almost kind of get to this point where you realize like, all right, yeah, you're right. We haven't done a great job of stepping into that gap, but you've got to realize that your big government has hindered that.
Yeah.
You know, and what has to happen is both people have to be willing to like own areas of failure on the part of their side or whatever.
So, I mean, basically what we're talking about is the poor and the needy, because these women that these guys, that the pro-choice advocate highlights, are people who are in need and can't take care of themselves. That tends to be the picture they paint. And I get it that that's not everyone. There's people who just don't want kids, and like, you know, this was, I was being irresponsible, and therefore, so
we're talking about in this conversation, just to clarify, we're talking about the people where there actually is a need.
Yes.
It's not just a convenience issue.
So like we've got to get to a point then where we can have a conversation. Okay. So what is, maybe asking the person, what do you think the solution is to that then?
Yeah.
Now they're going to go to a big government solution because that's their solution generally, just philosophically, for everything. That'll fix stuff. I mean, most people are kind of socialist bent towards that. So, and again, I'm generalizing. So if you're not that's fine.
Yeah.
So that's what I'm saying. You got to argue from kind of a ground level stance on here's why, here's the solution, or here's something that we can work towards. And then are we willing to put that into action the same way that we've put this pro-life stuff into action with people? Like, you got so many people who are willing to give financially towards this cause. You've got so many people who are willing to go and protest and spend time and have conversations and get things out to the public on this one stance. Are we willing to do that same thing for those who are poor and needy? Because there's resources that aren't being put towards that are being put towards other things by people who are pro-life. I don't hear a lot of churches, I don't hear a lot of conservatives talking about the poor and the needy and our responsibility to them.
Yeah. Well, and even like, you know, thinking in terms of sort of piggybacking off of what we were talking about last week, that's another aspect of that, sort of in that same vein as adoption and orphan care, is are there ways that we can provide? So Brian Croft has a great phrase that I use for a lot of different things. It's do for one what you wish you could do for 100. So you might not be able to take a big chunk out of this, but is there one woman that's pregnant that is in need where somehow you can provide health care for her, for prenatal care and for delivery and stuff like that? You know what I mean? Are there ways that we can get creative in addressing this and finding some solutions to this? Now, here's the thing, like, I'm a big idea guy, but I'm not like I don't implement well. So, this takes cooperation by a lot of different people that God has gifted in various ways. It's almost like, excuse me, it's almost like anything else that we do. You've got your certain people that are gifted in different ways, and they've got to come together on this somehow. And so I guess what I'm saying is, like, we can hold the line on abortion and the morally reprehensive nature of abortion, and at the same time seek to address some of these other issues that are going on that are real issues for some people, not all people, but some people, and find ways to address them. But nobody can do it alone. Like, this has to become something that rises to the awareness level and the passion level of the actual act of abortion for Christians. You know what I mean?
Right. Where's the outcry against the premarital sex that's happening?
Yeah.
That's causing so many women to become pregnant. I mean, all these things are, and I get it. There's other things that happen in abortion. Okay, I get that, and there's other ways that these issues rise up. I'm not saying that's the whole issue, but
right, yeah.
The mass look at the way that the family is supposed to function, and that the act of sexual intimacy is supposed to function, and how it's blown outside of marriage, and it's just a fun thing that people do.
It's a recreational activity now.
Like that's part of this cause. And where's the outcry from pro-life advocates against this attack on God's design for the family and for marriage and for sex?
Yeah.
Like, where is the fight there? I mean, that's a base level. If you really care about this issue, and our government and our society says there's all these other problems that are causing this, so we can't get rid of this, why not? Okay, I want to attack abortion. I'm going to attack it and try to cut it off at its feet.
Well, and here's the interesting thing, though. We can get really caught up in the issues like healthcare or abortion or premarital sex or the foster care system and all of this. And I'm a big proponent of this. Like, all right, let's have those conversations, but use those conversations to somehow get you back to the gospel. Because I think underneath all of that, underneath the sexual ethic, underneath the abortion, underneath the lack of care for orphans in the foster care system, underneath all of that is a failure of the church to evangelize and share the gospel.
But isn't it also a failure of looking at America and saying America's a morally good country?
Yeah.
Like, we look at people who aren't believers and say, well, they have good morals.
Right, yeah.
Like, we're a country founded on good morals.
Good Christian morals.
This should highlight the need for the gospel and the depravity of all human beings.
And that's part of the failure. The part of the failure comes from that attitude of we're like the new Israel. We're the new Jerusalem here. This is God's chosen land. America. Yeah. And so we're all okay. Like, we're basically good people. You know, we're all basically Christian. And that's led to an apathy in sharing the gospel, because I might not be a Christian, but I go to church.
Yeah.
You know, culturally that's acceptable. Well, the culture has shifted. It's not, you don't get street credit for going to church now. Like, that might actually cost you street credit. So now it's actually like, it's not a socially advantageous thing to be a Christian like it used to be. So now we have a shift in our culture that we can sit there and decry that shift and everything else and bemoan the fact that it's not the way it used to be. But the reason it's this way is because it used to be a culturally Christian thing and people weren't evangelizing and the gospel wasn't spreading. And the evidence for that is the number of people that show up to church that can't explain the gospel. And so what's the basis for a God-honoring sexual ethic? It's not, well, social pressure or social shame or it's the morally right thing to do. Even though those things might be true, the basis for a sexual ethic that actually impacts our culture is I'm an image bearer of God. He's designed me and created me to be in fellowship with him. I want to honor him with my life and with my sexuality, and I'm expressing my faith and trust in him through God-honoring stewardship of my sexuality. And so underneath all of that is this issue of evangelism and the gospel, and so like just real quick. So like we talk about abortion. Yes. We talk about babies being image bearers of God in the womb. Yes. Amen.
But they're all conduits.
But winning the abortion debate does not win people to the kingdom and does not address the underlying issue.
That's the whole point of it's funny. We spent hours talking about this, but this is the whole point of why it is important to engage on their terms or in the areas they want to without losing your convictions. It's because your goal is not to win them to a pro-life stance. Your goal is not to win them to see things your way. Your goal is to win them for Christ. Mm-hmm. Your goal, if you're a believer and you're holding to pro-life and you want to engage in that conversation, is to help them see their fallenness, to see how abortion points to the depravity of man and how they need a savior. Yeah. Your goal is to share the gospel. And we've completely lost that goal in these conversations, and you can see it everywhere when people talk about it. And when we talk about these issues too,
even with those other issues, right? Like the healthcare issue or the orphan
That's
issue.
What I'm saying. Why not engage in that issue? Because it's going to lead. It's the same conduit. It can lead you to the same place of wanting. Hey, you know what? You're right. And why have things become this way? So we can talk about all of the issues, but at the core of it, it's because man is wicked. Mm-hmm. And man is sinful. The whole point of engaging in these conversations is not to get people to say, you're right, killing babies is wrong. Okay, I think everyone there, you got suppressors of the truth, and you've got people who are of faith. So you've got righteous and unrighteous, right? Righteous by faith, unrighteous by suppressing. Their conscience still tells them, even in the suppression of that truth, that what they're doing is wrong. They just don't care.
Yeah, or their conscience is seared, and the only way to break through that seared conscience is the gospel.
Is the gospel. So you could sit there and argue with somebody and I think this is an oxymoron, but I really think there are people that are ignorant that are believers that are pro-choice.
That's a tough one.
I know you might not agree, but I think you can't. I think people. It logically doesn't work out, right? Okay, but you can think that that's not really a life, and therefore it's not wrong to abort this fetus because it's not a person, right? So you've got people who are in that mindset. I wouldn't agree with them, and I think you can show them how that's not true,
right? Yeah.
But at the same time, I think you can have those people, and they do have faith. I think there's some ignorance there.
Yeah.
So you can have those people on both sides, but by and large, the people who are pro-choice are not believers. Mm-hmm. So why aren't you sharing? Why aren't you talking about these things to share the gospel? They need to believe in Christ to see that the sanctity of life.
Yeah.
We tend to approach these conversations as I just want to convince you on my position on this one social thing.
So there's a guy named Jeff Durbin, and he's a pastor in Arizona, and his church has a pretty robust pro-life ministry where they go to abortion clinics and they protest, they share the gospel, they have conversations with people. They have people that have signs that say, like, we'll adopt your child, and they're willing to step into that gap and provide care for those those moms, and they've saved babies through that and everything else. But one of the interesting things is they've got a lot of YouTube videos of them doing this. And one of the interesting things is that Durbin always goes to the gospel with people. He always uses that as an avenue to get to the gospel. There are people that are screaming at him and yelling at him, that they're like in his face, and he doesn't waver on his conviction on abortion, but he gives a reason for it. He gives a grounding for it, and that grounding for it comes back to the gospel, and he shares the gospel with them. And so there's like, we have to recognize that underneath this is something much deeper than the evidence, as horrible as it is, the sort of like the symptom of abortion. And I just wonder sometimes how much we get, like, we got to find a balance, because yes, we should stand against murder, all murder. Yes, we should stand for life, all life. But we need to do it in a way that is standing for it and at the same time offering people the hope of the gospel, because underneath all of that, we realize that in this life, that's the only thing that's really going to bring about change.
And I don't think that's the point. Is I don't think we actually. I think we know that, but our actions show, and the things that we engage in, that we don't actually. We don't really care about evangelizing and sharing the gospel with people.
Maybe a good way to phrase this would be like, in your discussions about this issue of abortion, what is the difference between a unbelieving pro-life person and a believing pro-life person in that conversation? Yeah. Is there a difference?
There should be. There
should be, yeah. But practically, like functionally, is there a difference? Is there a hope that you have as a Christian that's being communicated? Is abortion highlighting the depravity of humanity and the need for a savior and the necessity of faith in justification and forgiveness, and highlighting even, like, I mean, we can, I don't know if we're going to do another show on this, but we could talk about this, like the way that we talk about abortion with women that have had abortions, that regret them, that are dealing with significant remorse and regret because they come under conviction of the fact that they've killed their baby. Do we talk about this in a way that offers hope for them?
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, or is it, or do
like, we demonize them?
Yeah. You're like, yeah, that was a horrible thing. Yeah, that was sin, but Jesus forgives sin. You know what I mean? Like that having you to the gospel and the hope that the gospel provides. And
part of that conversation is, are we willing to reflect Christ to that person? Or, because what a lot of quote unquote Christians do is judge that person, demonize that person, make that person, yeah, you did something terrible. You need to repent for that.
Full stop.
Full stop. I'm not gonna reflect Christ to you. I'm not gonna reflect the Father to you, that hey, we'll help you. We love you anyway. Where is, because a lot of this steps into, and I get that we can't live up to the standard of what people who are on the outside say. Well, you're just hypocrites. You guys do everything that you that you preach against and that you speak against. And in some ways, yeah, we're still fallen people.
Yeah,
but we're striving. And why can't we just say, you know what, you're right, we do, and we do stupid things still, and we say stupid things still, and we hurt people still. That's why we need the gospel, like using these conduits and these doors that are open for us to have conversations, like these political issues of healthcare, of the poor and the needy, of the orphan, of abortion, are all conduits, avenues, open doors to go and talk about Christ with people. And all we get hung up in the weeds, talking about the issues. And what I'm seeing is, why not walk through the door when you're trying to talk about abortion of, we don't care about the woman, and use that to go and share the gospel, instead of, no, You're trying to distract me and you're trying to shift so we don't talk about the main thing.
It is kind of instructive. John chapter 4 with the woman at the well. Jesus does not ignore her sin. Go get your husband. I don't have a husband. Yeah, you're right. You have 5.
Yeah.
And the one that you're with now is not your husband. Right? So he doesn't ignore the sin. Yet at the same time, where does he go with the conversation? If you would know who I am, you would ask me and I would give you water, living water. You'd never thirst again. I can fully satisfy every hurt, every pain, every need that you have.
And I can fully forgive.
And I can fully forgive and all of that. And so, like, I think when we have those conversations, we need to hold a hard line on sin. Yes, it is sin. Yes, it is separating you from God. Yes, it is offensive to God, but he's also a God that forgives. And Christ is the means by which we are forgiven. And so you don't have to live in that guilt. You don't have to live in that shame. You can be freed from that. You can be forgiven for that. And you can have a life that has hope of joy for eternity, and you can have a life that reflects God's character and that can be used by him to save other people. Yeah.
This is you and I, we've had a lot of conversations this week about just simplicity and excellence in ministry. And it's the same thing in everything in our life. The thing that we're called to do is a simple thing. It's not an easy thing,
right,
but it's a simple thing, right? We proclaim a message through how we live, through what we say. And it's a message that is offering forgiveness and eternal life, and it offering a heart that's changed. That's ultimately what needs to happen to address these issues is people need their hearts changed.
Mm-hmm.
So why would you, if you're a believer and you're passionate about these issues or passionate about the issue of abortion, why? Are you passionate about it because you care about the sanctity of life, because each person is a image bearer of God, and killing them is defaming, and it's rebelling against who God is and how he's created us to function, and you don't want people to offend God. He's worthy of worship.
Yeah.
If that's your goal, because you love God because of what he's done for you, why would you not use those? I just see so many people using these avenues to only talk about the issue and never get to the core of the problem, which is you need a savior. You need the gospel. And we never talk about that in any of these issues. Why not walk through any avenue that God opens for you? So if somebody's going to stand on a pro-choice argument because of all of the orphans we have, walk through that door.
Yeah. You know, the way that we have to have confidence that one day all wrongs will be made right. Right. And we also have to understand that in this life, that's not going to happen. And so we should be working toward seeking justice for the innocent. And we should be working toward caring for the needy. And we fall toward that. Like, we fail at that. At the same time, though, all of that seeking justice, all of that care for the needy is done with the aim of reflecting and sharing Jesus Christ. It's not just because the people are poor and because poor people need help, or poor people are, poor and I'm not, and so I'm just going to do my morally good deed for the day. It's a means by which we can show genuine care for them, and that genuine care for them is ultimately shown in sharing the gospel with them. And so we talked about this last week in Sunday school. Like it's maybe it was last week, maybe it wasn't. I don't remember. But like, we share the gospel. Yeah, it was last week. We share the gospel by our actions, but not our actions alone. Our actions are means to share the gospel with our words. And that comes from a genuine care for that person and genuine love for the Lord. So I guess I'll say this and then you can wrap it up. But in our approach to these things, do you see government regulation? Do you see electing the right people? Do you see outlawing it as the ultimate solution to this issue of abortion? Do you see caring for the poor's physical needs, caring for the needy's physical needs, caring for orphans' physical needs as the ultimate end? Or do you recognize that the only way that this is truly going to change is if people's hearts are changed and they're reconciled to God? And the only way that that's going to happen is through sharing the gospel. I'm serious, man. Until the American church at its grassroots level, I'm talking about ordinary individual members of ordinary small congregations around this country, get a hold of a passion to see lost people come to faith in Christ and a willingness to open their mouths and share the gospel, nothing's going to change. That's what happened at Ephesus. In Ephesus, there was a riot because people weren't buying idols anymore. They didn't stop buying idols because they were outlawed. They stopped buying idols because their hearts were changed.
Yeah.
That's the only way that this is really going to. And so we should do what we can. But the best thing that we can do is be sharing the gospel regularly and have a passion for that and encourage others toward a passion for that.
You've got to have a passion for that, though, to be able to go out and do it. And to your point, it seems like with where we're at, where the church is at, that people are lukewarm towards this idea of evangelism.
Mm-hmm.
That or they've lost the vision, and whether that's just through the leadership or whatever it is, that's not for me, that's for the professional.
The culturally Christian church.
Yeah.
Which is not a Christian church because you can't be culturally Christian.
And I mean, this ties into a lot of issues about how the church functions and the organization of the church, and it not functioning naturally, and actually the people going out and doing the ministry.
Mm-hmm.
Like a lot of these issues are tied back to a lack of love for the gospel and a lack of love for seeing people come to know Christ.
Yeah.
So if you want to argue the issues with a pro-choice person about abortion or the need of the poor or all the orphans or whatever issue that you disagree on, if you're just arguing, like you said, if you're just arguing and trying to get the right president or the right senator or the right congressman,
which
have
shown, by the way, over and over again that they won't do anything with it.
Exactly.
Just so
they have a pretty bad track record.
Since 1973, there's been a track record of failure in this area.
Yeah. So are you going to continue? And we seem to put our hope there instead of our hope in God. So are you going to see those as just trying to win arguments from a social standpoint, from a political standpoint? Are you going to use those? And this is kind of the whole point of this. Why not use whatever it is that you're talking about from a political standpoint? And I'm not saying that we shouldn't advocate for
the fact that we've said that about 70 times over the last 2 days.
But doesn't it?
No, it evidences something, because somebody's going to listen to this and go, "Well, they don't care about abortion.
Yeah.
They must be pro-life. There must be liberals. They must be this or that."
Okay, if you care about the gospel, then you care about abortion.
Yeah.
And you care about the needy, and you care about the orphan, and you care about the widow and the elderly and those who are not as well off as you. If you care about the gospel, then you're going to care about those things because you care about what God cares about.
Loving your neighbor
as yourself. That's a big part of it.
Yes.
I mean, seriously, like if we thought about how much do I love myself and provide for myself, and
I love myself way too much.
Do things
man.
I want.
There are a lot of times when
I love other people like that? Because we're just like, well, I need to love my neighbor. Well, what does that mean?
Yeah.
Like you love yourself.
Rabbit trail.
Can you imagine? Yeah, exactly. So if you do you care about the gospel? Do you care about who God is and who he says he is and what he's done for you? Then you'll care about these issues and you'll use them as an avenue to share the gospel. Stop talking about the surface issues and get to the core of it. And stop
just talking about the surface
and don't be
issues.
afraid to go and talk about the other things that people are confronting you with.
Yeah.
So many of us are unwilling to do that. Oh, you're just trying to distract us. You're just trying to talk about other things so you won't actually maybe nail them down, but
you can be a gospel ninja and take their distraction and turn it into a gospel conversation.
We do. We need to be
gospel ninja. That's a new phrase. That's a new thing now.
So I hope that this has been helpful. Like I feel like we've rambled a little bit.
That's all we do, man.
I
if somebody's listening to this, they're like, they apparently enjoy.
But this is an important social topic, and it's so in the public right now and in the public eye. And whenever I hear people talk about it, we are especially conservative, pro-life people who are proclaiming that they're Christians. Hardly ever do we talk about the gospel.
Yeah.
Hardly ever.
Yeah.
That's where it needs to change. If you want to make an impact on these issues, you've got to talk about the gospel. It's got to drive you. The conversation has to be driving towards the hope that's found in the message of the gospel.
So I'd love to say this is planned, but this last 2 weeks has sort of been a case study in taking a conversation seemingly unrelated to the gospel and tying it back to the gospel. We started off with abortion.
Yeah.
We moved to orphans. We talked about healthcare. We talked about the caring for the poor and needy. And then we showed that all of those things relate back to the gospel because none of those things are going to change apart from the gospel. Like, just do that. Like, seriously, like we talked about a lot of stuff that wasn't really seemingly unrelated to the gospel.
If you really care about abortion the way you say you do, then you'll point people to
move it to the gospel.
Yeah.
Okay.
That's how you do it.
That's how you do it. I don't know if that's how you do it. Like, an example, maybe a very poor one.
That should be your goal.
You might not have 2 hours to sit down with somebody and ramble about stuff.
That's true.
Anyway, all right. So that's it for today. We're 50 minutes in. So.
Wow, that's it. Okay. Well, like I said, hopefully it was helpful.
Yeah. So. And figure out something for next week.
We're thinking about.
Let us know what you think about this. Like if this has been helpful, if this has been a conversation that challenged you, or if you think we're wrong on something, let us know.
Yeah, and we'll talk about that. But we're also thinking about, or I was thinking about having a discussion. I can't remember if we've done this before or not, but having a discussion on listening to listen and to understand versus listening to, like, especially when you're talking to somebody you disagree with. Are you listening to try to hear where they're coming from? Are you listening to recant what they're saying and to come back at them? So you might think about that or something else.
Yeah,
so,
we'll see.
All right, so we'll be back next week. Hopefully you'll join us then for the next episode of the Pastor Discussions Podcast, your weekly conversation on doctrine, faith, and the Christian life.